It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Tuesday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, or if you are joining us on the YouTube channel, your first watch every day. It's Tuesday. It's Herd Mentality. Tons of great stuff to get into. Let's get started. First one comes from Benjamin, who says, what are your projections for Khalil Shakir this year? I'm super pumped to see him play. You think we will see him occasionally on offense, barring no major injuries? You know, Khalil Shakir is a player that's going to be tough for me to project this season. It's a pretty crowded wide receiver room, and the targets are just going to be tough to come by for him, in my opinion. You know, I think he's going to be behind Diggs and Davis and Crowder and McKenzie, and so he's kind of in that fifth receiver role. So I don't know that he's going to claim a ton of market share this year, but I do think he's a guy that the Bills will groom to potentially be the featured slot player in 2023. So I think this will be a quiet year from a receiver perspective for Khalil Shakir as he's onboarded and develops chemistry and learns the system. And he's scheduled to have a bigger year in future years to come. I do think that he has a good chance of being one of the options to be the Bills' punt and kick returner. That's definitely something I think is in his wheelhouse, and I think he's definitely in line to potentially claim that role. So that could be where he makes the biggest impact in 2022. JR says, I was watching a video on YouTube this past weekend on all the Josh Allen highlights of this past season. One thing that really stood out to me was most of his highlights, Josh was under duress when making plays. I agree with you that this current lineup of offensive linemen is the best our quarterback has ever had. Do you think that with cleaner pockets, the Bills' offense could get significantly better in the up and coming season? Could our offense strike even more terror into opposing defenses? I, for one, am excited to find out. Yeah, there's no question about it. I do think that there's a good chance that Josh Allen faces less pressure this year than he has in previous years because the offensive line talent is better than it's been in previous years. Now, I think that speaks for itself, but what JR's question provoked me to do is kind of look into some of the pressure metrics and where the Bills are facing pressure from and kind of deliver some information for you here that is pretty telling and, you know, maybe a spot on this offensive line that we can look to as a real opportunity for Josh to face less pressure and, you know, lead to a more dynamic offense as a result. So a few things I want to share. Josh Allen, 18th most pressured quarterback last year in the NFL in terms of percentage of dropbacks under pressure. So Josh Allen wasn't pressured a ton, but he wasn't near the top of the list in terms of facing the least amount of pressure. He's kind of right in the middle there. Now, here's the good news. Josh Allen's passer rating under pressure in 2022, top 5 in the NFL. He's very good under pressure. Part of what I think made the pressure more frequent than it should have last year is because of the offensive line combinations. There were so many different groups, especially at guard and moving Darrell Williams around a ton. And that kind of makes it difficult. When you talk about the offensive line being 5 guys working together, makes it difficult when you have a lot of different faces in the lineup on a weekly basis. But I do want to highlight where the pressures came from. You know, what part of the line was responsible for the pressures. And we'll start with the quarterback, right? As a quarterback, you can be guilty of causing pressure. If there's an unaccounted for player that you need to identify as hot and get the ball out, or you hold on to the ball too long, like it can be your fault that you face pressure as a quarterback. Josh Allen, 12% of the pressures he faced was because of himself. That's 16th in the NFL, right in the middle of the pack. Interestingly enough, the guy that's 32nd in the NFL that creates the most pressure on himself, Pat Mahomes, Kansas City Chiefs. 22% of the pressures the Chiefs gave up last year were the responsibility of Pat Mahomes, dead last in the NFL. Left tackle, 15%. That's fifth best in the NFL. That's outstanding. Put some respect on Deion Dawkins' name. If you are a hater, you shouldn't be. He's awesome. Left guard, 17.7%. That's 14th in the league. Center, 13%. That's 18th in the league. Right guard, 23%. That's 21st. Right tackle, 26%. 25th. Tight end, 1.6%. That's 6th overall. So you can see a lot of the Bills' pressure came from that right side at guard and tackle. And you like to think that Spencer Brown in year 2 or David Quessenberry, whoever wins that job, can be a more consistent presence at right tackle. And then Ryan Bates, the presumed starter at right guard, should be a more consistent player than what the Bills had at that spot, which was a revolving door all season long. So I'm excited to see how this can evolve, and I think the ingredients are in place for Josh Allen to face a lot less pressure this year than last year. Caleb says, hey, what does it mean to put the franchise tag on a player? For example, Matt and Ryan were talking about after this year, the Bills can tag Tremaine Edmunds. So for those unfamiliar with the franchise tag, it is a designation that allows NFL teams to select one player that is scheduled to become an unrestricted free agent and guarantees them another year under contract. So if a guy is scheduled to become an unrestricted free agent, you cannot come to terms on a long-term deal. You can apply the franchise tag and pretty much force them to play for you for another season. And the way that the amount of that contract is determined is either the average of the top 5 salaries at the player's position or by calculating 120% of the player's current salary, and the player gets whichever is higher. So in the case of Tremaine Edmunds, if the Bills were to apply the franchise tag to him and he plays under the franchise tag in 2023, that amount's probably going to be around $19 million. Folks, that ain't going to happen. If Tremaine Edmunds is under contract with the Bills beyond this season, it's going to be because the Bills were able to work out a contract extension. What gets really challenging about linebackers in the franchise tag is a lot of pass rushers, a lot of edge rushers are factored into that off-ball linebacker amount, and it balloons it up. You know, I think guys like Von Miller, Khalil Mack, those players are factored into the linebacker franchise tag, and you get to some weird numbers. That's why it's at like 18.5, 19 million for 2022. You'd expect that to be even higher for 2023. Ed says, in your most recent herd mentality, you answered a question about what the Bills would have most likely done different in the NFL draft had the J.D. McKissic contract actually went through. That got me thinking about comparing and contrasting the two halfbacks, and I have a few questions for you. Who do you think the Bills would have preferred to have out of the two? I'm guessing J.D., as it wouldn't have cost them a second-round pick to obtain him. Which one is a better all-around back? I'm guessing Cook, as it seemed like McKissic's stats were overwhelmingly in the receiving game. Had they obtained McKissic, do you think they would have drafted a more all-around halfback at some point in the draft? Good questions here. And I think I can sum it up by saying this. I think the Bills would prefer James Cook to J.D. McKissic. Now, let me tell you why. James Cook is younger, he's cheaper, and he's a more dynamic athlete. That makes him more appealing to me. J.D. McKissic's a good player. I would have been very happy if the Bills got him. But when you see the end result here and you realize you got a younger, cheaper, and more dynamic player, that's the one you want. And I do think that Cook is the more all-around player. And I do think that if the Bills didn't draft James Cook and they signed McKissic, I'm not exactly sure they would have picked a running back. I'm not fully convinced of that. But if they did, I think it would have been later and potentially a more all-around player, but a guy that doesn't necessarily have any standout trait like the Bills got from a James Cook. Need to tell you guys about Bet Online, the number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. You can find everything there, the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news this season. They've got Major League Baseball, football's futures, golf, boxing, MMA. They've got it all. Live betting, esports. Check them out. They have Vegas casino games. It's a lot of fun over there. at betonline.net is your number one spot. Again, for all your betting needs and sports information, check out the website. It's super easy to use on your desktop or mobile device. And get started. Get started in on the fun over at BetOnline. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Next one comes from Ryan, who says, looking at Brian Daboll's career as an offensive coordinator, it hasn't looked good until he worked with Josh Allen. Granted, the stops before he got weren't thriving organizations. Is Daboll a product of Josh Allen, or will he be able to transform the Giants' offense into a top unit, considering the talent there as well? Well, look, Josh Allen and Brian Daboll benefited from each other. They grew together and respectively became a top-tier offensive coordinator and a top-tier quarterback. I don't think we have to do this thing where we give either person more credit. They benefited from working together. They became the best versions of themselves working together. Now, here's the deal with the Giants, and I think Brian Daboll deserved that job, and I think he's going to get it right eventually. But right now, that team's not in great shape. That offensive line is super worrisome. Their quarterback, Daniel Jones, is very unproven in a make it or break it type year. He's been underwhelming. I think he's kind of a limited player. They've got nothing at tight end, and I think their wide receiver room is full of question marks despite having some talented guys. So I think it's going to take some time, and I don't necessarily have high expectations for them this year, but I think that Brian Daboll can maximize the potential of that group in 2022 and then obviously build and get it to the way he wants to over time, and I believe in him as a head coach and what he can mean for an offense. Matthew says, I sent you a herd mentality question a while back asking what position you thought your daughter would be if she played football. Your response was awesome. At that time, I believe my wife and I were expecting our first baby girl. Well, fast forward a year, and now my daughter is almost 14 months old. It's incredible to see how fast she's grown in just that 1 year. I was wondering if you could give us an update on your little girl. Also, I was wondering if you could give us an update on your book, Go Bills. I'd be happy to here. I know it's been a while since I gave an update on my daughter. She's 2.5. Her name's Rebecca Jean, for those who don't know about her. I do a lot of updates on her on Instagram. So if you are interested in kind of seeing that side of Joe Marino, check out my Instagram. I think my handle is at _Joe Marino. Do the stories and all that type of stuff and have some fun on there. But she's awesome. Like I said, 2.5 years old. She's full of energy. Very, very sweet girl, but I will say she's a little bossy. She's definitely a little bossy. Super active. We keep her going. Pretty much, preschool 5 days a week. That happens in the morning. And then in the afternoon, she either has dance or swim lessons. And we keep her really, really busy. And, my wife does a great job of making sure that she's engaged in the community and different stuff going on around here. She's a super smart little girl. I remain blown away by the things that she says on a daily basis and where her vocabulary is at. And she's a lot of fun to talk to. And I'm amazed at how good of a communicator she is at this age. She loves to play, as you would expect from somebody who's 2.5 years old. We play a lot of hide and seek, but I will say that she's a cheater. Whenever it's your turn to hide, she pretty much just follows you and she puts her hands over her face like this, but she's peeking. So we got to get that sorted out. Loves to play with toys, loves to go outside, loves to go to the park, loves to go to the pool. She's an active girl. She's a happy girl. And man, she keeps us going, and we love being parents. As for the book, Go Bills, I can't wait for everyone to get it. If you haven't ordered your copy, BuffaloBillsBook.com, you can check it out. It's literally just the entire history of the Buffalo Bills, where I go season by season, 1960 through 2021, and I tell the story of the season. There's you can look and see the starting lineups, the statistical leaders, the Pro Bowlers. There's some breakout stories on some of the bigger moments in team history, some really awesome photography throughout. I'm really excited about it. I turned it in. It was due in April, and so I turned it in, but now it's that waiting time where there was a couple weeks of editing and publishing and formatting, and the publisher handles all that, and then it's about getting it printed and shipped. And so the expectation is for it to come out late August, early September. And folks, I can't wait for you to get it. I'm super proud of the project. I'm super excited about all that I've learned from writing the book. And I cannot wait for everyone to get it. So check it out. BuffaloBillsBook.com is where you can pre-order it. And there are some really cool pre-order incentives for you to check out. Scarecrow says, following up on your Tremaine Edmunds podcast, my one point of contention is that the Bills don't appear to be as committed to Edmunds as they claim in their press conferences. Bean has typically extended their core players a year early, such as Josh Allen, Trey White, Stephon Diggs, Deion Dawkins, and several others. If they are committed to Edmunds as a core player on the team, why are they waiting to extend him? Well, I think you got a fair point there, Scarecrow, but I still think there's a good chance it gets done before the regular season. And I think you can look at some players like a Matt Milano who didn't get signed a year early, right? It was like on the doorstep of free agency. We didn't think Matt Milano was going to be back, and he signed the long-term deal. I think we can all agree that Matt Milano is a core player on this team. So I don't think it's the end-all, be-all that he hasn't been signed yet, and I still think there's a decent chance that this deal gets done before the start of the regular season. Now, the other side of that could be Tremaine Edmunds. Maybe he wants to take advantage of putting together another season to increase his value. Maybe they're having some challenges getting to a number that makes sense for both parties based on what has been established about Tremaine Edmunds to this point. So I think you got a fair point. I don't think it's the end all be all, and I still wouldn't be surprised if an extension is done before the start of the regular season. Mike says, I saw an NFL.com article about James Cook and 1,500 yards from scrimmage. I saw it too. Is that even in the range of outcomes? Thurman Thomas 2.0? Thanks again, and go Bills. I'll tell you, I saw that article. I think it's extremely aggressive. I like James Cook, but I don't know if I can get behind this. I mean, when's the last time a Bills running back had 1,500 yards from scrimmage? It's been a while, right? It's not that common of a thing. So expecting James Cook to come in and do it as a rookie on a pass-heavy offense where he's the backup running back, I don't know. I don't know if I'm on board. If you're going to average 1,500 yards from scrimmage, or you're going to total 1,500 yards from scrimmage, that means you're averaging 88 yards per game. I don't think that's going to be in the cards for James Cook this year. I think maybe 50 yards per game or 60 yards per game is possible, but 88 seems a little high on average. 1,500 seems really, really high. And I guess I'll be able to give you an even better answer next week, because I will tell you that next week I'm going to give you my stat predictions for the Bills. If you guys have been listening to this podcast over the last several years, every year I come out and I put down all of my stat projections for all the offensive players, and I'm going to be ready to do that next week. And I think the last couple of years I did pretty good, and I was pretty aggressive in projecting Josh Allen to really break out in 2020, and I fell pretty close last year as well. So I'll give you those projections next week, and I'm going to be sweating over them in the coming days and, of course, over the weekend as I sort it out. And that'll allow me to answer questions like this and, the Khalil Shakir question that I got at the beginning of the podcast with even more confidence behind the research that goes into coming up with those projections. Keel says, your recent superlatives episode got me so incredibly pumped for this upcoming season. Your comparison between this season's choice for comeback player Jamison Crowder and the departed Cole Beasley was eye-opening and very encouraging. One area you didn't discuss was their injury histories and reliability. Can you fill us in on how dependable Jamison Crowder has been? So that's a fair point. I will admit that Jamison Crowder hasn't been the same as Cole Beasley in terms of availability, which I guess makes it even more impressive that he's been a more productive player in his career despite playing less games. So if you go year by year for Jamison Crowder since he came into the league, he played in 16 games, 15, 9, 16, 12, and 12. So he's had a couple of years, 3 of the last 4 years, he played 12 or less games, but never less than 9. So that's encouraging. It's also encouraging, remembering how good of a job the Bills do with managing workload and being mindful of preserving their players and doing a really good job to help guys stay available. And so I think Jamison Crowder is really going to benefit from his time in Buffalo. And, I think he's probably going to play 13, 14, 15 games at least this season, if not all of them. I think the Bills will do a good job of managing Jamison Crowder. Keel had a follow-up as part of his question. He said, also was wondering what your thoughts are of Roger Saffold as a comeback candidate. I've heard his last season in Tennessee was underwhelming. Notably, former NFL offensive lineman and Tennessee Titan Brad Hopkins has been very critical of Saffold's performance during his time in Tennessee. I know a mediocre Saffold is likely better than what Buffalo has had at guard, but does Roger need a comeback year to perform at the level we are expecting? I'll just come out and say that I disagree with that assessment from Brad Hopkins and anybody that says that he's been underwhelming. I think Saffold's been a high-quality player for the Tennessee Titans. He was a Pro Bowler last year, and I'm extremely comfortable with him coming over and providing at least above-average play for the Buffalo Bills at guard in 2022. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions like, is your Odyssey an LX or an EX? And wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and save money when using Rock Auto. Why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? They have everything you can need. Brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Make sure you write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know that we sent you? They have amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need over at rockauto.com. The next one today comes from Chris, who says, with the Bills announcing the rough layout of the new stadium complex, it had me thinking about where Josh Allen will be in his career when it opens in 2026. Do you know where this would put him in terms of age and contract status? I wonder because I remember watching something about the construction of Atlanta's new stadium and how the Falcons brass brought Matt Ryan in to give input as to where he would like to see things like the play clock. And I would hope the Pagulas and Bean would do the same with Josh Allen. Also hope the Pagulas can take a note from Arthur Blank when it comes to food and drink prices. Hey, we can dream, right? Yeah, listen, I've been to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. And the concession prices are shocking. Like what you can get for $10 is impressive comparatively speaking to other venues. So I do think, or I do hope with you that the concession prices are in line with what has happened in Atlanta. But in 2026, Josh Allen will be entering his age 30 season. He'll have 3 years left on his current contract, which I'll be honest with you, I don't expect his deal to look the same in 2026 as it does right now. I think you're looking at a restructure this offseason because the Bills can restructure him and free up like $20 million in cap space. So I think that's definitely going to happen. And I think that'll become a norm with Josh Allen and that deal to allow the Bills the flexibility to obviously keep Josh Allen, but keep the roster slam full of talent around him. So I think you'll see that happen. And he'll be entering his age 30 season. And how Josh Allen ages as a player is going to be really, really interesting to me. But at age 30, I'm expecting him to be a high caliber elite player still. And obviously with a lot of optimism that he can continue that for a while longer. You know, is Josh Allen going to be the type of quarterback that pushes 40 years old? It's hard to say, but I don't think we're going to be worried about it in 2026. I still think that he'll have plenty of really, really high level football left in the tank. And obviously I'm sure he's going to want to put his stamp on that stadium, right? Like you think about Peyton Manning and Lucas Oil Stadium there in Indianapolis and how much he's responsible for something like that happening. Josh Allen's going to have that same type of opportunity. And I do think that Josh will have influence on the stadium design. I mean, he basically got his way with the offensive coordinator pick of Ken Dorsey. Surely they're going to consult him when it comes to the stadium. Marco, who asked this question from Switzerland, he said, I listened to a very interesting podcast about evolving offensive trends over at The Athletic. Many of the best wide receivers in the game, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, Jamar Chase, are targeted in the slot for a significant share of their targets. Stephon Diggs was quite an outlier in the top tier. Do you think the Bills' offense could be more versatile and unpredictable if Diggs is lined up in the slot more often? Yeah, I certainly think that's possible, but to me, that's more of a compliment to Stephon Diggs. When you play from the slot, no disrespect from players that play from the slot, you are given free releases off the line of scrimmage. It's a heavyweight fight out there on the perimeter. And Stephon Diggs has proven that he's that dude on the perimeter. So not only do you have an outstanding player that you want to play on the line on the perimeter, but you've also had good slot players, right? You've had Cole Beasley. If Cole Beasley's going to be your primary slot and you want to kind of flex out your tight ends and move Gabe Davis around, and you have a player that can win consistently on the perimeter in Stephon Diggs, then I understand why it's been that way. So could the Bills move him around more, have more short motions, do things to allow Diggs more, I guess, easy opportunities to make plays? Sure, I think that's possible, especially now with the makeup of this offense, not just the receiver room, but what I think the Bills can get done with their tight ends and their running backs. But I certainly understand why it's been that way. And to me, that is more of a, feather in the cap for a guy like Stephon Diggs to be able to have the production that he's had with none of it being cheap at all. I mean, he's literally beating dudes, winning routes on the line of scrimmage with consistency at a higher clip than anyone else. So I love that about Diggs. It says a lot about him as a player. Kelly says, we know that the Bills defensive line has had a heavy rotation the past couple of years so that no individual player has played a high percentage of the snaps. When first joining the team, Von Miller talked about his versatility, how he could do whatever the staff needed him to do. Any chance they might rotate Miller between left end and right end, allowing him to have more time on the field. This could allow their other ends to stay fresh and keep a high percentage of snaps for Miller. I think Von's going to play both sides. There's no question about it. And I think he'll probably be the primary right end with Greg Rousseau being the primary left end. But they're going to move Von around, right? That's the type of player that you get creative with and dictate matchups and put him in favorable spots to rush. So I think you're going to see him play both sides of the line, maybe even as a spinner at times, shooting the B gap. I mean, this is a player that you can really deploy in a variety of ways. Now, I know he's primarily been a left side player in his career, but I don't think he's limited. I have no concerns about this. I think Von's going to play all over the front, make a ton of plays, and play, 60 to 70% of the snaps. Kevin says, I love the Tremaine Edmunds exclusive pod. Can you break down linebacker responsibilities and herd mentality, either in general or specific to the Bills? Also, can you talk about the differences between the Mike, Will, and Sam and how those roles align with the Bills linebacker group? So the Bills, look, they play two linebackers. They play a Mike and a Will. So you don't really see a Sam linebacker. When they had Lorenzo Alexander, they did play him as a Sam. But for the most part, your Mike is your inside linebacker, your middle linebacker. It's a do-it-all player that has to be able to play downhill. Instincts are critical. Coverage range in terms of being able to get depth in pass coverage is critical. But that's definitely an all-around player that has size and instincts. Your weak side linebacker, that's your Matt Milano player. That's your pursuit style matchup linebacker, a guy that you'll play in the overhang. You'll allow him to play free and pursue and really chase from the backside. That's kind of your weak side linebacker, a player that can be a little undersized, but being able to play in space and run and cover are really, really important characteristics of a weak side linebacker or a Will. And then your classic 4-3 Sam linebacker is a guy that plays on the strong side. Is more of a take-on defender. He's going to play over tight ends and stuff like that. You're going to walk him down quite a bit. You can use him as a pressure player and a blitzer, a lot like Lorenzo Alexander. So if you really kind of wanted to paint the picture of what this would look like under Sean McDermott, Tremaine Edmunds is your Mike, Matt Milano is your Will, and Lorenzo Alexander is your Sam, right? A take-on player, a pressure player that plays on the strong side. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. Tomorrow, we are going to have the deep dive conversation on the wide receiver position. So just like we've done for running backs and tight ends, we're going to break down these Bills wide receivers. And so I'm looking forward to that. Have some fun stuff planned the rest of the week. So don't miss anything. Make sure that you are subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. If you like what's happening here, how about a 5-star rating and a brief review? That's always so helpful to the podcast and for discovery of the podcast, and would greatly, greatly appreciate it. All right, folks, that's it for today. And I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.